Welcome to the MeasurePod, episode 115, this time with Igor Howell. And I'll start by introducing myself because I always forget to do this in these episodes. I'm Daniel Perry-Reed. I'm an analytics consultant at MeasureLab. And of course, I'm joined by Bhav Patel, Director of Experimentation and Analytics at LeanConvert. So, Bhav, we've just ended our chat with Igor, and it was incredible. We haven't really spoken to anyone like Igor before in the world of data science, content creation, and I find it fascinating. And as you said, possibly one of our youngest guests, living and breathing that kind of culture of content creation in YouTube. What was your initial reaction?
Oh yeah, that was a roller coaster of an episode. I feel like I had so many more questions, and I could have kept going and going. And I feel like this is already turning out to be probably one of our slightly longer episodes. So I won't take up too much time on the intro side of things. But it's really worth a listen if you're in the field of analytics and you're kind of thinking about like what is the difference between what I do versus what a data scientist does versus what a machine learning engineer does, and what are some of the skills I need to harness to kind of supercharge my analyst job. You don't need to like want to move into, I don't personally want to transition to data science, but I appreciate the advice that Igor has given. I agree. I followed a lot of it over the last few years myself in terms of being able to supercharge my skills and do more data sciencey work, even if it doesn't come with the job title, the pay package. So I would say it's worth a listen. Dan, you're absolutely right. This is one of our more unique episodes in the sense that we don't often have an Igor like person on our call. Igor's he's approaching the world of working from a very different way that we would have done when we would have entered, right? So he's come through the sort of like the content creation route and how that's amplified his ability to land a job. Of course, he's worked super hard. It hasn't come easy, but he chips away, chips away, chips away, and so it's a great example of, and he'll talk about it. It's a process, right? Anything like this, it's a process. Content creation is a process. Learning analytics and data science and machine learning, it's a process. So yeah,
Well, and if you're wondering what all these terms mean and what the hell data science is, we try and cover that as well because I had to ask the question. So stay tuned for that. Look, all I say is enjoy the episode with Igor. All the show notes are full of links of all the things we discussed today. So head over to the Measure Lab website, link in the description of whatever app you're using to watch or listen to this. Last thing, Bav, before we jump in with the episode, anything to plug, anything to say, anything coming up in the world of Bav?
one of these days I will have something to plug. At this stage in time, I have nothing to plug except for last night we held Crap Talks 27. Don't know when you're listening to this. The next one is in March. Put it into your diaries. It's in London. Would be great to see more people again. Then probably March 12th or 13th.
Amazing. Well, let me follow that up with a Crap Talks Brighton plug. Crap Talks Brighton number two. We're going to be scheduling that for the 4th of March. So another one in March. I haven't yet to do this, but by the time this episode comes out, there'll be a meetup page. Just register. It's free to attend. There's drink, there's food, great people, great energy. We'd love to see you there. All right. On that note, let's jump in.
Hi, Igor. Welcome to the Measure Pod with me and Dan. It's really nice to have you here. I've been following your work on LinkedIn for quite some time now, and I've been seeing your numbers grow and grow to a phenomenal rate. So, why don't you intro yourself? We love to give our guests a chance to tell us their origin story in their own words. So, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it fairly short because it could go for ages. So I'm Igor. I'm currently a data scientist slash machine learning engineer. I've been working in the field now for 3.5 years. Uh, Originally, was doing a master's in physics, University of Surrey. So that was from like 18 to 2022. Kind of during my year, I basically my starting point was basically I wanted to do physics research full time. And then basically during my studies, I realized physics is not for me. It's a bit slow, not very fun. And then I'm a very, what's the word, philosophical person. I think things happen for a reason almost, or like things come into your life that you can take advantage of. So I think when I was midway through my research year, the AlphaGo documentary dropped. And it was in my like homepage feed. And like most people wouldn't click on a 2-hour documentary video about AI, particularly because it wasn't that popular at that point in time. Like it was known, but it wasn't like as it is now. And I watched it, I was like, oh, I was blown away. I found it so interesting. And basically from then on, got interested in machine learning and then just started teaching myself data science and then eventually landed my first graduate role after university. So nothing like particularly special. It wasn't like, I wouldn't say like it was a massive struggle, as in I know people struggle to find a job after university. Don't get me wrong, I always say like I did try really hard, probably harder than a lot of other people probably would. don't know if that sounds arrogant, but I think that probably is somewhat true, because it wasn't like just instant my first job. I had to apply for loads and loads of hundreds of jobs just to get it. And then when I got my first role, I basically just started blogging on Medium, because that's just to upskill myself. I'm always trying to look for things that make me stand out compared to other people, because I don't. It's a bit boring just doing the same things everyone else, right? So like Medium was a place purely just for me to like upskill, learn more about data science, teach myself more, and to be honest, just to make it look better for employers. Because I think there's a famous saying from JP Morgan. It's like a man has two reasons of doing something: the official reason and like the real reason. Is very much like it's saying you do two things. You do one because of the politically correct thing, or like you do one because it looks good, and there's a second reason where there's a real reason why you're actually doing it behind the scenes. So that's kind of my approach to blogging, and then from there transcended into YouTube and to other content essentially, which we can discuss in more detail.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's do it. I mean, because I mean, just talking of YouTube, I want to talk about one of the videos that I watched before this call. But I mean, 15,500 subscribers on YouTube is nothing to be sniffed at, right? I mean, this is incredible. When you say I just do some YouTube videos, blog on Medium, this is a big kind of audience, and it's kind of gone. Well, from my perspective, this is really interesting to see what you're doing there and where you're taking that. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that. Like, how did you find yourself making YouTube content talking about data science when, for one, you have a data science job, two, you're writing on Medium, three, you've probably got a life outside of data science to get on with as well. So, what kind of drove you to do this kind of content creation?
So, like I said, originally Medium was a starting point just for me to document my understanding and learn better and just learn more, and then a bit obviously stand out in the market. Then, if again, the real reason why I was doing it, Medium slowly transitioned into more of a side hustle. Like it was earning decent income for me. So like, not like millions or thousands, like a few £100s a month, realistically. And then at one point, I remember, I think August 2023, Medium had a problem where, not a problem, it like changed the way it distributes earnings. Don't get me wrong, I always say I don't write purely for the money, but the money is a big benefit of why I do it, right? I wouldn't just constantly upload, or like post blogs if it wasn't any financial benefit, to be honest, because that's like a side tangent to it. And then at that point, I was like, well, okay, like my earnings are actually slashed. And I've always wanted to do YouTube. I've actually had a few YouTube channels in the past, not data science related, just like other things. I was like younger, like FIFA or like gaming YouTube channels. I was like 14. So I have a lot of experience on YouTube, and I knew how, not experience, but I knew how it worked. I've dabbled in the past. And I was like, well, okay, again, another sign. Like there's something telling me here that I should be trying to do something else. And so YouTube as a platform is more mature. I think you reach an audience, you're more kind of you reach the audience more of a personal level because they hear you speak, they understand you, they see you on video. Blogging is less kind of connection to the audience. And I've always wanted to do it from like a young age. I was just always too embarrassed. But then, as you get older, you overcome it. And I just started. And it wasn't really a big step for me because I was kind of comfortable putting myself out there anyway. Um, First video is absolutely terrible. Still my channel, dreadful. But like everything in life, you just take time and eventually you build up. And like I said, I think YouTube to me is like my thing I'm most passionate about. Like I really enjoy video creation. I enjoy talking. I enjoy filming process. I enjoy learning how to film. And the point was like most of my content on YouTube initially was just like lecture style videos on time series analysis and forecasting, and then like probability distributions. I mean, there's like an hour video on Bayesian statistics, which no one watched, but I did it anyway. And then eventually, like those, you find what hits the audience more, and people wanted more advice-based content. So eventually, I started just doing more like how to get into data science and things you should know. And at this point in time, I was still quite junior, well, like 2 years, 3 years in. But you speak to the beginners because the beginners are the biggest audience anyway. How many mid-level data scientists are there looking for content? Probably not many. How many people looking to become data scientists? A lot. And even now, if I try to appeal for mid-level data scientists, don't get much of an audience there.
It's really funny. We actually recorded a podcast really recently, Dan and I. We had a question on one of our Slack community channels that both Dan and I are part of, and someone was looking for mid-level data analyst material. And both Dan and I responded to this person, and we were like, just saying how actually the reason why there's so much more basic level material out there is, first of all, you can take a cookie cutter approach to it where it's kind of like universal. It's very applicable across many different roles, regardless of like, if you're a product analyst or a marketing analyst, like the underlying skill sets are very similar. And the size of the audience is huge. But actually, as you progress further and further up the ladder, and you become more and more senior, the people available to do those videos starts to shrink, and actually there aren't that many that want to do it, plus hold down a full-time role in a mid to very senior role and do video creation. So we it's funny you say this, and this resonates really well. Both Dan and I literally recorded a video around what advice to give to sort of like someone who's entering into that mid-level stage when there isn't that kind of content available. So it's I hear you, man.
It is quite interesting because I understand what you're saying is quite, particularly in the data science space, we're very less developed than software engineering. If you go on YouTube and look at software engineers content, there's a lot more. If you go to data science, very small. Machine learning, very small. I have a slight hypothesis in that, because if you're really, really, really good machine learning engineer, data scientist, or like you're really good, you're probably not posting content because you probably prioritize your career over anything else. Does that make sense? I kind of know that, yeah, I'm not saying I'm great. I'll say I'm a decent data scientist, but I'll never be the best of the best realistically, because it's just too hard. But I can be the best in my kind of intersection of content and data science. So there's people out there posting content. I mean, I can't give mid-level advice because I'm still mid-level, so it's a bit redundant for me. But hopefully, as I progress up the ranks, I can give more tailored advice, and hopefully, the audience can follow me on my journey, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to like tell people the best way of doing things. Just this will work for me.
Well, this is why I think your journey is so good, because you are at, I don't want to say early stages, because by your own admission, you said you've been doing it for 3 years now. So, in data science space, like it's like dog years, right? That space develops very fast and very quickly, and everyone's learning and developing and understanding it. So I think I think that's why I think your channel is so interesting, is because actually this isn't someone who's talking down at people. It's someone who is very much at the grassroots stage, maybe not quite grassroots, but at grassroots stage, and you're taking people with you on that journey of your own development and sharing your knowledge. And actually, it's a very unique angle, because you don't see that very often. And so yeah, no, that's why I was so keen to have you on the show. I was like, I saw your post recently. You hit, not only are your YouTube numbers great, you've also just surpassed 5,000 subscribers on your newsletter, right?
Yeah, the newsletter is a car crash of a newsletter. I say this every time. If you read my posts, they're everywhere and anywhere about anything I want to write about. I mean, there's a slight focus on data science and like machine learning and kind of like the business side. But if you read some of my recent posts, they're all about like mental health. So it's actually quite a wide range of things. But like as I kind of what's the word developed like stuff, or I develop my audience, I'm very transparent with everything I discuss now. I don't try to hide anything, pretend to be something I'm not. Obviously, YouTube is purely helping data science. The newsletter is more like get to know me and like a bit of personal wisdom, and just see like people have problems, like everyone else does. So my newsletter is kind of, I don't know if you've read a few posts, but if you scroll down the history, it's not very data science focused, but I don't try to make it purely data science focused necessarily.
It's funny, my medium is very similar to your kind of like that newsletter approach, where it's not purely focused on data analysis. I kind of bounce between subjects which are very relevant to me. So you'll see, there was a post I wrote about what it's like managing a team remotely and build, and this was written at the, like peak pandemic. I was just going through it. I was like, what works well? How do you succeed when you're working in a remote environment? And then there was another one on how do you hire a product analyst, which is, it's still a very nascent role. So that was a problem I was struggling with. And I kind of like, I don't say I solved it, but like you, I was solving it. So I was like, it'd be fun to write about. So no, I get that. I think it's kind of cool that it's a mishmash of things, but your YouTube channel is very much tailored and focused on sort of like this very specific discipline that you're part of.
Exactly. I want to kind of also get away. I think LinkedIn is very sterilized, and I want to get away from that kind of view of people. I mean, depending what industry you work in, but I always want to be just. I have a tendency to overshare, I think, and be very vulnerable with people. Like I always speak what's on my mind, and like if I have feelings about something, I'll let you know. I won't try to hide myself, only because I feel like, what's the point? I don't know. I'd rather be open with everything I have, and if people don't like it, they don't like it. I'm not hurting anyone. I know some people say like you shouldn't share everything online. Like don't get me wrong, I don't share
I
like
disagree. I share everything. My wife says I share way too
yeah.
much
Oh,
online.
really? Do you? Yeah. I mean, it depends. I'm not going to share my personal relationships with other people, for example. Like I'm not going to say like oh, me, my partner, or me, my ex-partner did that. You know what I mean? That's like their private life. But if it's about my private life and my struggles, that's fine because it's me. I'm not sharing about anyone else. And I do that because, well, why not? And also it's cathartic. I always say that, writing about your problems. Um, and normally the response is quite good.
I mean, like it's really interesting you talk about that. So, like, I mean, like let's go to one of the examples you gave in with that video around how you became a data scientist. So, I'm thinking for those people that are listening that are interested in this concept of data science, maybe it's still a bit alien to them. Maybe they're trying to get into this world themselves, or it's an area that they think they might enjoy. I remember one part of the video when you explained your journey. I think you said you applied for over 300 different jobs before you got your first data science role. And I think, so when we talk about sharing your experience and your story, I think it's really relevant. It's really valid because you've been through it. This isn't just, oh, I applied for a job and got it, and I'm going to document it. It was an approach. So that video, by the way, we'll link to it in the show notes. That was a year ago, and you gave a bunch of advice on how to get into data science, right? Let's take a step now, right? Let's say someone's asked you, he goes, "Oh, I'm really interested in this data science. Where do I begin? What do I do? Have you got any advice of how do I get in?" I wonder if your opinion on that has changed since then.
Yeah, I mean, it's always it varies every year on year. Obviously, I'm not in the initial stage anymore, so it's hard for me to be precise. And then field does move in 3 years. I would say now it is harder, but I always caveat that. Well, it's always been hard. When I was applying for jobs, it was post COVID, it was hard. Then a few years, it was redundancies, it's hard. Like I don't think I've ever heard a cohort of people complain that it's not hard to get a job. So, like in my opinion, that's just like a given anyway. You're going to face. In terms of how to get started, it's always like everyone has their advantages and disadvantages, and you got to use them to your advantage. So, like, obviously, if you have a STEM background like me, with a master in physics, you're obviously going to have an advantage. I don't hype that. I mean, people always say, like, can I do it with a degree in, history? I'm like, yes, you can. It's harder though. It's just like not beating around the bush and just understanding that it'll take time. My main thing is like I've given so many roadmaps online. I think I always say to people, it's one of these things that getting into data science, I've written an ebook about it. It's hard. It's simple, but it's hard. The process you follow, you just got to learn, build projects, optimize your CV, apply for jobs. It's a very, very simple, like everything in life is very simple. It's just hard work and consistency. And I know it sounds very cringe, and people say like, "Oh, yeah, fine, you're saying this," but that it literally is the truth. I don't understand why it's people try to find hacks. There is like kind of things you can do to be better, but I always say to everything, it's just time, patience, and playing the odds, and eventually you get somewhere. That's just how it works. You just got to increase your luck.
That's classical human behavior, right? I think instead of doing the doing, they're sitting there watching videos of you on how to do the doing, right? When they could just go and start it. They've watched the video, they go and do it, but no, they want to watch the next one, next one, next one. The next thing you know, that they're actually just procrastinating. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit to sort of like Dan and I's sort of like primary audience of analysts. Like, if you are a data scientist and you want to get into data science, Igor actually, funnily enough, has a YouTube channel where you can do it. What we want to talk about today is people who are working in the data analytics space and are not, maybe they haven't quite harnessed the skill sets and the tools and the parts of the job that they need to do in a traditional analyst role, just because they haven't been exposed to it. What are the kind of like the core skills you think an analyst should be able to do, that they can kind of like tap in from, from the data science space and the data science world?
Can I jump in before we do anything else and just be like back even one step? Let's define data science and analyst, right? Let's define those. Yeah. So where's the overlap? What's the differences? And then I think we could do it, because I mean, I for one am really curious, and I think we all have a slightly sort of different, unique perspective on this. Anyway, Igor, over to you. What is a data scientist and what is an analyst?
Right. So I've done a video on this in the past, and it does vary between companies. But if you want what I think it should be, and what I think it is in most companies, data analyst is purely analytical and like prescriptive statistics. And I think the difference between a data scientist and a data analyst mainly is the predictive models you'll build. So data scientists normally do more predictive modeling, predictive statistics, building statistical models, building machine learning models. That is kind of the main difference you will find. So they kind of have, I say this like, not to offend anyone, they typically have better mathematical skills, like understanding of calculus, probably a bit better statistics. In general, you kind of need a bit more knowledge to be a data scientist than a data analyst. There is an overlap, of course, but I think the main difference is that a model building and more of the predictive statistics. That's the main difference between the two roles.
So now, going back to my question then, Well, actually, no. In that case, what is the difference between a machine learning engineer and a data scientist? Because that's where you kind of have two titles, based on like what you said at the start of this call. So, how do you? What is the distinguishing factor between those two job titles nowadays? Because I think like 4 years ago, Forbes claimed that data science was the sexiest job in the world, but they hadn't really at that time. The concept of machine learning engineer wasn't as mainstream as it is now, and everything was like data. People were just changing they were analysts, but they were just changing their job title to data scientist and asking for 20 grand more in their pay package.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So it's a transition. I'll answer it in two ways. There's kind of a nuance to this question. So data scientists, you do kind of more of the modeling building side. Most data scientists don't know how to deploy production code. If you ask a lot of data scientists I've met, they don't really understand how to write production code on unit testing, CI/CD, deploying AWS. A lot of it is changing now, but a lot of it was like notebook based and a kind of like offline modeling. Machine learning engineer is kind of a mixture of a software engineer and a data scientist, where what will happen is, like, say you build a model, you will then deploy it yourself on, say, AWS, GCP, whatever kind of cloud server. But then you're basically delivering value directly because your model will be actually in production, making live decisions. So machine learning engineer understands how to bring a machine learning model into live data, so live predictions. Now, where it kind of fades in that, in my previous role at Gusto, I was kind of a machine learning engineer, even though my title was data science, in that I'll build the models and I'll also deploy them, which is what machine learning engineer does. In my head, at the moment, what's happening is that data science is going into two different pillars. You're either more of an analytical experimentation data scientist, like product analytics, running A/B tests, doing more of the statistical analysis, or you're more of a machine learning engineer data scientist, where you're building models and also deploying into production with the help of software engineers, things like that. So I think data scientists is now pivoting into those positions. Obviously, it varies, but that's kind of where I see it going. Particularly at Gusto, that's what happens, or at least in my role at Gusto, that's what's going on. And like where I'm now at Deliveroo, machine learning engineer is very much more deploying and coding models, and data scientist, from what I know, haven't started yet, is more like experimentation stuff like that. So there's kind of a split between those roles now.
So one of my good friends, Sean McGeer, Dan, you remember Sean from one of the Crap Talks events where he gave a really fun talk called Data Science versus Data Religion, and in that talk, I know it's not about the talk really, but he's always said to me like, because I refuse to call myself a data science based on the latter definition of what that machine. And I always consider, I was like, no, I'm not a data scientist. I don't build predictive models and put them into production. I do more of the statistical analysis of experiments. I can build forecasts and I can do like I can do regression analysis. Like I can do all of that kind of like the statsy kind of side of things, but I refuse to call myself a data scientist. But this was like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Now I'm kind of kicking myself because I wish I had just called myself a data scientist. I would have been earning way more money. So
Well, I was going to say, but it's now you can argue that at any point in time. I mean, a lot of the machine learning engineers, they're now AI engineers. You know what I mean? Like you can retitle stuff to make it sexy for the moment in time to capitalize on this kind of budgets that are available. But I mean, it still doesn't change the brass tacks of what we're doing and the approaches we're using. I mean, a lot of the tools might change over time, but a lot of them are consistent and the methodologies are pretty similar, right? I mean, again, things change all the time, but an AI engineer today and a machine learning architect from 4 years ago are probably doing a similar role.
well, actually, it's funny you say that. I think what's happened, certainly, I've observed like 3, 4 years ago, people were hiring data scientists and they realized what they really needed were data engineers. So, because what you had was you had these people, the data science job titles, but they were having to build data warehouses and data pipelines and maintain the data, the code, and before they could even do the data science side of things. Anyway, so we've established some things. We've established what machine learning engineer is. We've established that data science is a gray area at the moment in time because it could mean either closer to the analyst side or it could mean closer to the engineering side. And then we know what analyst is because that's what me and Dan do day to day, and we have done so for longer than we can remember. So for any analysts that are listening and potentially having that kind of like, Igor, what I loved about what you said was actually you tried to talk about the human aspects of your role. There are a lot of analysts who are out there probably thinking they've got imposter syndrome because there's these data scientists who are coming through and they've got all these fancy skills and fancy qualifications and I don't know what else they have that's fancy, but they're probably feeling like there is a skills gap that's missing. But you and I and Dan, we've just discussed that maybe there isn't a skills gap, certainly in what was previously perceived to be a data scientist. So, so now, what would you say an analyst needs to do to bridge that gap and become more data science in that kind of like experimentation and testing world?
Yeah, so I would definitely learn some sort of, not necessarily machine learning, but more like predictive statistics. So linear regression, gamma regression, all these regression models, polynomial regression, logistic regression, understanding how you do basic regression analysis is very key. I think a lot of machine learning, I hate the word machine learning because it's not really machine learning. And I hate the word AI because AI is just machine learning and machine learning is just statistics. You could digress it back. Um, well, my point is, I think you learn more of like the heavy statistics and particularly the regression analysis part. Like understand how to build basic models, understand more about how you build predictive things. Once you can do that, then you can do like basic machine learning. Basic machine learning is really simple. I mean, I've had analysts at Gusto I worked with who basically came up to scratch of like gradient boosted trees really quickly because it's just once you understand the theory behind it, the packages don't do a lot of it. It's more the how you build the models. So like, I'll give you a really simple example. When I was working in insurance, um, most people, say I should build a model to predict claim severity, which means like the cost of a claim. Now, most people would just build, a linear regression model. Now, there's a trick there because a claim can never be negative; it can be zero. Whereas linear regression assumes that it's normally distributed, and normal distribution can be negative. So that's where you need that knowledge of like, oh, okay, I need a gamma model or gamma target because that can be non-negative. It's things like this which are more like you need to understand the intuition behind building predictive models, and you only really get that from studying statistics and not necessarily machine learning to start with. So if you're a data analyst, focus on just purely statistical predictive models, and that will be the bedrock for everything else you do. That is actually the main thing I think most people in the data field should also study as well.
So I really like this, and it's nice to kind of go like because sometimes we talk to our guests and the topics go a bit abstract. So it's nice to have be talking about something that's a bit real and understand sort of like the use case. So again, for someone who's listening, say, okay, cool, Igor, I understand what you're saying. I need to learn something about linear regression models and gamma regressions and things like that. But what am I doing then, like when might I use that? So what would be the advice that you would give in terms of a practical sense? Because yes, I could read where I find the way that a lot of people teach is there's theory and there's application, and never shall the two meet in the professional sense for some reason. So how do you bridge that gap between the theory of statistics? Because I understand the use case of linear regression model, right? But someone who has never come across it. I did my undergraduate degree in maths and I dropped stats, not realizing that's going to be the biggest part. I hated stats when I was doing my undergraduate maths degree. But now I'm kind of like shit, I wish I hadn't dropped and I wish I'd taken it into year 3. So the application, where do people go to understand when they should use a regression model, when they should use a gamma ray? Like that application aspect I feel is missing.
It's a hard one because
That's what we do here, Igor. We ask the hard ones.
if you want this is my experience, right? So theory, I like theory a lot because it's perfect. Theory works. Theory works because it's based on mathematical axioms. It doesn't break. It's purely perfect. Statistics, state spaces, wherever you want, all that works perfectly because it's theoretical and it's based on, fundamental axioms of maths. In practice, nothing's that perfect. So how do you go about applying it in practice? It's basically just experience and trial and error. Like not trial and error in the same thing, but like that example I gave you about, let's say we have a claim. The claim can model as a normal and linear regression, gamma regression, but you can also model as a Poisson regression. Um, the point is neither is better because the problem is not so perfect that you can do it. So how do you go applying to real life? That's like any job, right? That's like you got to find the source, right? That's where you get your money from, and understanding these principles and what the best ones are to apply them. You only get it for experience. So the best way I would suggest it is one, build loads of things, like build loads of things for every single problem you have. Just try out so many models. Build a model using gradient boosted tree, regression, random forest, neural network if you have to. And through experience and practice, you'll get intuition. I think people think it's very formulaic, but there is an art to modeling, like modeling everything. There really is an art to it, and I've seen it happen before. I've worked with people who are like they can see things that I don't see, And it's not necessarily that they've kind of, this is exactly the process you follow. They just have that intuition. And like I said, you only get that for applying loads of things. And that's when that statistics knowledge will naturally just come out and you'll visualize it. I know it sounds really philosophical at a high level.
No, it's
but
absolutely
this
not.
is just what I've seen. And you can't rush that process. It's just intuition you develop through time.
So, because I think what you talked about there, you've introduced a third potentially risk factor that people aren't going to be fully aware of, which is when it stops being the perfect theoretical model and you start entering into more real life situations and you are trying to find the perfect model, you run the risk of overfitting, right? And you might not know when to stop. So, you've got your, let's say you're targeting some R squared value and you've hit like 60, 70%, sorry, 0.6, 0.7 R squared value. You probably should stop, but you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and you might try something else. And then you start realizing that you've got some type of like multi-collinearity happening, and then you're not really aware of it. So again, these kind of things are like people aren't there to teach them, right? So what's your advice in those situations? Because I 100% agree with you. You have to trust the process, right? You have to trust the process. You have to build, you have to build, you have to build. But there comes a point when you don't even recognize the mistakes you might potentially be making because of the imperfect world we're living in.
Yeah, and it's a hard question because like, what point do you stop? I think there's a saying from is it George Box? He was like, all models are terrible, but some are better than others. So you'll never get a perfect model. So don't chase a perfect model. It's impossible. As much as possible, chase the 80-20. That's what I'd say. At the end of the day, if you're working for a business like I do, all you care about is your model. Is your model generating profit, or is it being financially suitable for the business? That is kind of your holy grail, and that's when that kind of theory, non-perfect models kind of transcend, because it doesn't really matter how you build your model necessarily. As long as it's profitable for the business, then that's all that matters realistically, and that's what I try and do.
This is another favorite topic of mine and Bav's, which is talking about the measurability or the kind of return on investment in these kind of things. So let's say you've built a model, you've fitted it as best as you can, or where you're happy to stop, and you're saying about making revenue or making money for the company or being valuable in some way. How do you ensure that next step happens? Because once you've built your bit, you're relying on other people to make that into some money or some value, right? And so what is your approach to making sure that has succeeded, that you have made the business money and it has been valuable?
You mean in terms of how it's like deployed, or how do you ensure your model is financially, viable?
I think that latter one, because I was going to literally jump in and say, how do you know if you're like, I know there's an element of testing that you'd have to do, but how would you test that actually the model you've built is working? Because let's say you have amazing stakeholders who just trust you. They're like, yes, Igor, we'll do whatever you say. Like, we are not worthy, right? But they don't know. They're not comparing it against some, some control group. So how do you know in that case that it's work? How do they know it's working? How can you reassure?
It's a good
Uh,
question. It really depends on the model. What's works for me well in the past is back testing. So, i.e., you have your old model, new model, then you back test it. So in other words, you run the old model with all the information that a new model would have ran. So in other words, you timestamp it. So like if it was like what are we now, 23rd of January. If my model ran on 22nd of January, what would the results be compared to the old model? So basically, you have your new model and you're back testing all the previous results. So you see if it's actually better than a new model on the same input data historically. That's how I do it. That's an offline test. Then the other way of doing it is that when you deploy it into production, you run it in a shadow mode. So in other words, it's live, it's making predictions, but it's not actually making decisions. But you can compare the predictions and you can see if it's better. These are like really good machine learning engineering principles of testing models, both in production and offline, and eventually launch it live.
So this is
Very cool. I
if
feel
you
like I'm learning some new stuff.
yeah, I love this, but I want to go deeper on this, because if I've got a predictive model that can, and I'm running it in shadow mode, and I can accurately predict the lottery results every single time, it's still not valuable unless I go out and buy a ticket, and I'm not the one doing that, right? So what about that next step within the business of saying, okay, I've got this amazing predictive model. Who's going to go out and buy the lottery ticket? Who's going to activate that and use it to make change to be valuable to the business? Otherwise, we have a in clever machine, but it's not, sort of the next part hasn't been plumbed in yet.
I see. Well, yeah, it is really depends on your infrastructure. Like, let's say, from my assumption, you already had a model in place to make decisions. So let's say I used to work at Gusto. Let's say you had an algorithm that decides the recipes, and you find another algorithm that decides the recipes, and that algorithm is better. You can directly compare it. What you're describing there is very different because there's kind of, if I go into I can go into the details. There's two things here. One is like customer-driven behavior algorithms are very hard to measure because let's say I have a recommendation system for two things. It's really hard to know if my new recommendation system is better than the old one unless you do a 50-50 A/B test. You can't run it purely in shadow. That's one way of doing it. So if you want to know if it's better, then that's when you run an A/B test. For example, when I worked in forecasting, like forecasting stocks, that's quite easy because the forecast, it doesn't affect anything. And you can immediately see if your forecast is better because it's not influenced by customer behavior. So like I said, there's an art to everything. There's an art to this and really testing it. So in your scenario, I would do an 80-20 split test. Anything that's like, you want to do a test. And again, this when it comes to really business specific industries or very specific to the company. You want to do a test that really minimally affects the customers, but gives you enough signal that your algorithm is indeed bringing value if the customers are involved.
I suppose that's when it goes over to someone like you, Bhav, right, into the experimentation and the analytics side, and saying, pumping that into the marketing campaigns with bid adjustments or whatever. But that's the testing, and that's the hard thing to measure, like you're saying, Igor. But like, you can have an objectively sexier or better model, but actually putting it into practice and then run the test and see if it actually works, right? I mean, that's the thing. Does it change hearts and minds, or does it not? If you're doing a recommendation engine, for example.
Well, I think in this instance, actually, yeah. So you're right. I mean, this is Igor where we would step in. So as listeners will know, I used to work at Gusto, and I looked after a lot of the A/B testing that we had there. And I don't know who looks after it now, but the processes are very much, we would work with the product team to run A/B tests, and we actually A/B tested the recommendation algorithm. We tested the routing algorithm in the factory, and so it's kind of fun to have this cross-discipline way of working where you've got the data science team who are building these amazing models, and then sort of like my team would come in and work with the product teams to kind of test those models, understand the outcomes, do the analysis on them, and see, actually has it worked, hasn't it worked, etc., etc., etc. So I guess going back to kind of like the theme of what we've been talking about, which is that an analyst who is potentially looking to kind of like supercharge their skills, because I don't know if anyone saw the most recent report from the World Economic Forum. The top skill for the next 5 years is going to be analytical thinking. So I think there are going to be more and more people in the world who are probably looking towards more data science type skills, analytics skills, critical thinking skills, and it's this type of decision making, this thinking, this kind of like basic statistical analysis that's needed to be able to even do like the bare minimum at the moment, I would say, in most of these organizations. So, Igor, I have a question for you that is somewhat controversial, not for you, but for people who might be listening. Is we have you're familiar with the A/B testing world, right? How much of that do you think should be science, and how much of that do you think should be art? Because I know a lot of people who work in this space who actually don't have a background in statistics, but they are running A B tests all the time, day in and day out. Like, and I've had this debate for a long time. For me, actually, I won't influence your skill. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's a good question. I mean, like if we go back to what an A/B test really is doing, it's like statistical hypothesis test, right? Ultimately, and that's like, yes, it's I don't who was it? I forgot who did it. Was it a guy who did the plot? No, that's someone else. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was purely mathematical, and it's but at the end of the day, it's purely mathematical, but it's still statistics, right? You pick an arbitrary significance level, right? 10%, 5%, 1%. Why do you pick that? Again, that's an art to that. That's intuition. You don't pick it because it's right. You pick a certain distribution. You pick a certain sample size. There's numbers to back that up. I'm sure there's again, add definitely my knowledge. I'm sure there's literal derivations explaining exactly why certain sample sizes and certain percentages are better for certain cases. Like there may be some sort of mathematical reason for it. At least I hope. The question of how much is that art? Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because I feel like all the examples you get from hypothesis tests are very concrete. Like, the average height of the US is this. I take an average sample of California's height is this. how much of this is an outlier? How can I confirm with certainty that California is an average higher than the rest of America? That is a very like one-dimensional problem. Yes, you could do two-tailed tests, you do two dimensions. When it comes to testing things live, like we do, there's so many factors in there that's so difficult to understand, right? Because let's say Augusta, you launch a menu and you give half a menu to some customers, half a menu to other customers. It is a fair test, but just think of all the different, things that could be happening there. You're not really control the customers. You're not really in control when they log in. There's so many other variables that are very hard to measure. So it's very, it depends. That's everything. But I do think there's an art of it. Yeah, and I think there is an art to everything. And like I said, I think also statistics is one way of viewing things as well. It's not necessarily the only way. Sometimes common sense just plays a role in it. So, let's say you find a conversion rate of 60% for a certain group and then 40% for another group, but let's say that result's not statistically significant. Well, there's quite a big gap. So I know we're speaking in arbitrary terms here, but just because the numbers tell you something does not mean that's actually what's happening. So have you heard of, is it Simpsons paradox or Simpson? Is that I kind of equate to that or something similar because it's a bit more like, yes, there's a correlation there. It's a causation. There's something else going on here. It's so multifaceted. So I would say, yes, you can say it by pure numbers, but taking everything by pure numbers doesn't always work. So I'd say you need some common sense as well. Don't rely on purely the numbers on any decision you're making in like a business setting.
But you need that foundational knowledge, right, to be able to then make the trade-offs, right? So if you're going to introduce common sense, you're going to need some type of baseline, because I think a lot of people view A/B testing as, the ideation side of things, the hypothesis side of things, right? Whilst I agree, there is an art in doing user research, finding problems, doing things like assumption maps and problem statements, and all of these type of things that go with, like, like anything, like what there's a million things we should do. What should we do, right? There is that aspect of it, but then there is that kind of like other side of the coin, which is very much how reliable is the thing we've just done. And that is the thing. Like, and it's, we talked about the differences in the term data scientist. And I know at Deliveroo, even at Trainline, you have product data scientists who focus more on the experimentation side of things. So okay, you mentioned something that I'm going to dig into a little bit more just because we have a bit of time. You mentioned that just because the numbers say something doesn't mean it's true, right? Imagine I'm a business stakeholder and you say that to me. I'm going to turn around and say, "What the fuck, Igor?" Right? I came to you for an answer, and you're now telling me that, "Hey, look, just because I said it doesn't mean it's true," right? What do you do in those situations? Because you're right, in that recommendations example where you've done 50% one recipe, one menu, 50% the other. There are a whole bunch of factors that could have played a role in it. And but you need to make a decision at the end of the day, which one do we roll out? And if there are these additional factors, what are the criteria? Like, how much deeper should you go outside of just the p value for when you're doing these analyses?
Yeah, this is the thing, and this is where people get paid the big bucks, right? This is where you make the money because this is where you need that intuition in both sides of the camp. You need the business, you need industry knowledge, and you need the pure figures. And this is why businesses either do well or not because these decisions are quite crucial. How you go about it, I don't know. To be honest, it's again, every situation is so different. You have to really understand your business very well and understand what your customers are doing and how they behave. I think it transcends purely data science at that point, and you have to really take into account every single thing that your business is doing to make a certain decision. I know that answer is very vague, but it's just so like crucial to everything. I don't want to say follow this criteria, um, because I don't think there is a criteria. I think every business is so different and every situation is so different.
I get that. I did or I was asked to come and talk to a bunch of recent graduates around like careers into data and giving some advice, and it was really interesting. Like speaking to people, they're like, "Oh, what language should I use? What tech should I learn?" And I was like, "Well, maybe you should start by thinking about the industry or the vertical you want to go into. Like, do you have a passion for travel or shopping or insurance? Because being in the world of data, whether you're anything from tracking to analyst to data science. If I'm doing that in finance, that's a different kettle of fish to ecom to marketing. So my advice to them was always pick that. And I think this is kind of echoes what you're saying here, which is like the data says this, but you have to have industry or even specific business experience to understand the application of that and what the gears and levers you have to pull. I very much found out the hard way when I was very new into the world of analytics. And I was doing some attribution modeling, and I looked at the kind of the cross-channel mix, and I was just like, oh yeah, you should do more email, you should spend more on email. And I was just like, and I was just like, I can't spend more on email. And I was just like, oh, and I didn't realize at the time I had to learn. I was just like, what am I even saying? You have to be aware of the recommendations you're giving, if it's even possible, so that you know not to make a fool of yourself like I did.
No, I was gonna say it's quite interesting what you're saying there, because I've said it before in a few videos where I've pivoted from technology to solution to, solution technology, as in like, how do I solve this problem first and then do it? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what you do, as long as you bring money to the business. I know that's very reductive. As long as you bring money to the business, you bring money to the business. No one cares how you've done it, as long as you do it. Obviously, there's techniques in place and there's processes, but your job is to find a solution, no matter what the solution is. No one really, to an extent, no one cares that much. Build a neural network or you build a linear regression model, doesn't matter, as long as the money's on the table and you've done it. That's all that really matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that debate of should I learn Python, should I learn R, is just for people putting off actually doing any type of learning altogether. Just pick a lane.
I
And
mean, I
just...
do have an opinion on that. I think you should learn Python. I don't think you should learn R.
Okay, well,
I'm
let's
quite,
okay. I want to jump straight into the rapid fire questions, and then we can pivot and we can wrap things up slightly separately, because my first rapid fire question that I have for you, Igor, is if you could only do one programming language or coding language, what would you pick?
It depends on the question is. If I was going to be a machine learning engineer, I don't know. If I had to only code in one language the rest of my life, it would be Python. Not if I didn't want to be a data scientist, I could be anything else, right? I could be a backend engineer as well. Could be front ends. I could do loads of stuff with Python.
Second question, Igor. If someone asks you, where should I go to learn about data science? What's the one sort of location or place you would send them to?
That's an internet.
The internet. I feel like that's a bit of a cop out. Okay, let's assume it's all online.
I guess it's so specific. I would say I really liked blogs. Like there's paid. I have used paid resources in the past, but everything paid can be found not free online. But pros and cons to everything, right? I always say go for blogs because it's free.
You don't know any good data science YouTube channels, do you?
Yeah, but mine on technical stuff. Some of them are. So yeah.
Well, I would love to see how the YouTube channel evolves. Like you said, as you progress in your career, I think that the subject matter will naturally become more technical and deep, right? That's the reality. Last question we ask every single guest we've ever had on: what do you do outside the world of work to wind down? What do you do when you're not data sciencing?
Quite boring actually. I do a lot of sport. I play hockey 3 times a week. I run. Um,
It's anything but boring,
I'm
I
not
think.
that. No, but people will say like I kind of I don't really watch. I don't really watch Netflix. I don't really watch TV shows. I watch a lot of YouTube because I'm on the platform. I read. I need to try to read a lot. Um, it's mainly just sport reading, and that's it. I don't really have anything else that I do that frequently, I would say.
I think this
Uh,
is a generational thing. Like Igor, I was just thinking about this. I think you might be the youngest guest we've had on this show. Just the fact that you kind of like always on YouTube, like this is such like a generation thing. There is one question, and actually this kind of like brings me on to a point. I know Dan, sorry, we normally stop after rapid fire, but there is one question I've been dying to ask that I've been holding off. You mentioned obviously you want to try and move away from LinkedIn, right? Because it's for whatever reason, I can't remember what you said, but you want to move away from LinkedIn. I read about this lady recently who was a data scientist, and she switched off from doing PhD into moving to OnlyFans. Don't know if you heard about
okay.
this one.
No, no.
No,
Yeah.
she was doing a PhD and she was doing all these like YouTube videos and data science videos, and she stopped her PhD and now she only does data science videos on OnlyFans and Pornhub. Like, are we going to see you on those platforms anytime soon?
I don't think I'm the type of content creator they want on those platforms. Um,
No, I think the
um,
monetization game is strong. I mean, this
Well, this
article,
was it.
I read the same thing, and this person had, I think Pornhub versus YouTube, and it was like the revenue difference
yes,
was incredible.
I've seen this. Yeah.
And it was the same content, the same video. There was no difference.
Oh, really? So I
Yeah,
can upload my actual YouTube videos.
I think
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
worth a
But
go. It's worth a go.
I would say one thing, and I say this I don't know if anyone watching this. I say this every single video. I always recommend for anyone to start making content on anything they do in data science or tech. Anyone who watches this, they probably won't do it. But I always say it's such a game changer for your life and career. It's unbelievable. Like people say, "Oh no, whatever." I'm like, just do it. I know people always say like, "Oh, I don't think there's been a bigger like multiplier in my career, professional life, and probably personal life than content. And also like there is money in it, it just takes time. If you treat it like a business, it'll build slowly. But people expect business. Most businesses don't do well in the first few years. It's pretty normal. So
It's also the
there's
best way
that
of learning.
attitude with it.
Like you learn by
Exactly.
teaching, right?
Yeah.
By teaching we learn is I think there's a Latin version of that, but I think it officially translates to by teaching we learn. And I've been preaching this for years, Igor. So Dan and I, obviously, we have our own different ways of doing content. Obviously, the podcast is where we cross over, but I have been preaching for years to people to create content, to write more. Writing obviously helps you articulate your thoughts and structure your thoughts and like really understand what you're doing. And then things like video content, and I don't do video content, I won't lie. This is something I've been putting off just from pure fear of having it out there forever, and the written word no one can ever see.
I
Anyway.
also have not done video content. However, as of the time of recording, about a couple of days ago, I've got a Google Analytics 4 training course, and I recorded 80 videos, all between 1 and 8 minutes long. And they are now all on YouTube. So if you head over to Measure Lab's YouTube channel, it's just been flooded with pictures of my face and talking about Google Analytics 4 and loads of other things. So I would say I don't really create video content, but now there's almost 100 videos of me talking about stuff on YouTube. So there is that.
Right, you both have inspired me. One of my objectives over the next couple of weeks was to produce a handful of short bite-sized videos for my team internally around proper data analytics problems that they can think about and solve. Like, Igor, as you said, you learn by doing it. So this was kind of like that. So I'm going to do it. I've been putting it off, and I won't lie. This was an objective I was going to fail on.
Igor, we've got, I would ask the normal question of where can people find you if they want to connect with you, but I think we're going to be linking out everything, your YouTube channel, your newsletter, anything. But if you could ask them to do one thing, what would it be? Where would they go? Would it be YouTube, newsletter?
Yeah, go.
OnlyFans.
OnlyFans.
Go to YouTube. YouTube's probably the best place to go.
Awesome. And you can comment and chat to you, Igor, on those videos. And of course, every link that we've discussed will be in the show notes. I always try to make a good note of all the things we discussed. And I will put your LinkedIn profile in there. Thank you so much, Igor. But is there any last pearls of wisdom or advice that you want to give our listeners before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, I kind of said it earlier in the podcast, but I'll say it again in that I always say this to everyone. I mentor people, always tell them this, is that just be patient, take your time, and eventually you'll get there. And it's just putting in the effort. And everyone always says it, putting the effort consistently over time, eventually you get there. Don't be disheartened if you don't get your first job in 3 months, 6 months, even a year. Just take patience, follow. It's like, I know people say trust the process, but it is generally true. Just as long as you put in the effort and you play the odds, you will get your first job and you'll do well in your career over the long term. That's all there is in pretty much everything in life, right? Just time, patience, and effort.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Measure Pod. You can subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this on to make sure you never miss an episode. You can also leave us a review if you can on any of these platforms. We're also over on YouTube if you want to see our lovely faces and our lovely guest faces while we do this as well. Make sure to subscribe to the Measure Lab channel to make sure you never miss an episode as they come out. If you want to leave us a review, that would be hugely appreciated. You can do that on most of the podcast applications, or there is a form in the show notes you can leave feedback directly to me and Bhav. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.